There's some marvelous subtleties in what our scripture is about today, talks about today. And so we'll do our best to try to travel into there and see what we can learn. In 1989, I think it was, there was an earthquake here, the Loma Prieta earthquake. It's now quite history. That's how you can tell your age. It's when things that were vivid and real to you are just dim, hardly known to others. But it was a big deal when it happened. And there was a collapse of a piece of the Bay Bridge, and some people and cars were crushed in there. That was close to the time when we had first moved to this area, and at other people's suggestions, I had a very brief career going into a couple of local corporations, seeing if I could bring in these teachings in some way or another. I failed pretty badly, and it didn't last very long. It just wasn't my work. But this was during that period of time, and I had one connection at one of the companies. And after that earthquake, she called me. I'd been in to speak about leadership and stress reduction, a few little things like that. And she really wanted me to come in because one of the people who was killed in the Bay Bridge collapse was the wife of a well-known employee. And so there was an agitation going through the whole company about that fact, of course, because earthquakes are so startling because you haven't the slightest bit of warning. You're just there having an ordinary life, and then all of a sudden, the one thing that you really rely on just becomes unreliable. I remember, just to digress, in the middle of that earthquake, sitting inside of our buildings over here at the community, the phrase, it crossed my mind in the middle of it, that the phrase earthquake proof was oxymoronic. That if Mother Nature wants you to collapse, she will collapse you. And the second was this feeling that if I just got out of the building, because the building was rattling all around me, that somehow everything would be fine. So I got out of the building, and of course the earth itself was undulating. And the trees were swaying like this, and we watched the water in the swimming pool make its own tiny little tsunami and come over the fence and fall like this. And on a profound level, you realize how deeply you just rely on the material world to stay in its natural order. And when it doesn't, it throws everything into question. I did not immediately think of God. It took me a little longer than I'm proud to admit. First, I was just conscious of the fact that nothing was as it should be. So here I am talking to this human resources director, and she knew who I actually was and what my context in life really was, but we had had some very good discussions about what was and was not going to be allowable once I stepped inside her bailiwick. And definitely the word God was a big no-no. I was able to talk about energy, even like cosmic forces, as long as you stayed away from that exact word, and nobody could accuse you of having said it too closely. So she says, can you come in and talk to people because they're so nervous, and help them? And I thought for a moment. I said, not without talking about God. She said, well, can't you just tell people to have confidence in themselves? Well, I said, you can have all the confidence in the world in yourself, and if the Bay Bridge is going to collapse, all your self-confidence is not going to keep it from collapsing on you. We are working with forces that are simply much greater than ourselves. And the only way that we will ever have the kind of confidence you're wanting us to have, that can, and I'll quote Master on this, that can stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds, which even like 40 seconds of an earthquake qualifies. You don't know when it's going to stop and how much is going to break before it's finished. And to stand unshaken in the midst of that, your consciousness has to be rooted in something that far transcends mere self-confidence. Now there's another factor in that, the concept of self-confidence, which of course is a good idea, nobody's against it, is that we're not as stupid as we look sometimes. We can really put forward all the self-confidence in the world, but whether or not we bring it up to a state of full awareness, we recognize how vulnerable we are. We've all had experiences, whether it's 40 seconds of an earthquake or a car crash or the death of someone that we were relying upon that we completely did not expect, or the treachery or the desertion of something that we hoped always to have, the company we worked for all our lives, the investments we made that were absolute certainties, the children that we devoted ourselves to. And I'll use Swami's word once. A couple came to Swamiji and they were very concerned about their son. And Swamiji, the first thing he said to him is, well, sometimes you just get a lemon. He said like that. And I think he was just trying to break them of their expectations. After he let that sit for a moment in shocked silence on their side, he said, but I don't think so in this case. But sometimes you do get a lemon, you know. Antipathy, you can be drawn as your children. People can come to you as your children for any number of reasons. Master made the chilling statement that, antipathy also has a lot of magnetism. If you intensely dislike someone and think about them a lot, you're quite linked to them. And sometimes they're born as your children, as Master said, so that you can, quote, fight it out in close quarters. Isn't that gruesome? But we've all seen it, haven't we? So this idea that we can get our security from ourselves, no matter how fiercely we assert it, a large part of us knows that we are just faking it, that this is a Halloween costume, convincing, but not really our true reality. And so no amount of affirmation of that can make something true that simply isn't true. Now, the premise of this, of course, is that there are true principles in life. And they're not true principles because any institution claims them, or 1,000 million people believe it, or the government has declared it. It's true because it's the way we're made. And alone on a desert island, we would still discover the same realities. That is the principle of self-realization, not as a religion, because not because it's a religion, but we realize our true self, not the little self that's trying so hard to hold it together, but we realize who and what we actually are. Master himself said that if all scriptures were destroyed and all sages disappeared, you would come back to the same truths. We would discover, we would see the spiritual eye, we would find the energy in the spine, we would recognize the power of goodness. We would perceive light and realize that darkness is merely the absence of light, not a reality in itself. And so when Swamiji tells us, when Jesus tells us in the Bible, as Swamiji has presented today in this reading, pray believing and it will be so. The question is, what are we believing and what are we believing in? A woman wrote me a letter saying that she was, desperately in love with someone who didn't love her. And what should she do? And I answered her saying, I would really love to be able to tell you, just pray and affirm and make all your little pictures and your lists and all of these things and it will happen. But I said, you can pray forever. And if this is not really in your own best interest spiritually, no amount of willing on your part will make it happen. Now these are very tricky teachings because the other side of this, and it's not the other side, it's the right perspective on this, is that we do have an enormous amount of power to manifest and bring about what it is that we set our determination on. Swami Kriyananda, he tried so hard over all the years that he was in the body trying to train us, poor souls. People used to often say the phrase, poor Swami, referring to what he had to put up with. I never liked the sound of that, so I never said it myself. But sometimes when I think back now, having known him well for 40 years, and being just in my early 20s when I started, poor Swami, it's the only thing I can think of. He really had to put up with a lot. And one of the things he was always working with was the vision that he had of what was possible for us and for Master's work And for this community of Ananda as an expression of that work, compared to how small our consciousness was about it. We often had discussions over the course of years. Whenever a question would come up, Swami would often say, come to my house for tea at 4 o'clock. That would be what you'd do. You'd come to his house for tea at 4 o'clock and we'll discuss it. And then whoever was appropriately included, we'd have some discussion. And they were usually pretty sensible discussions. Swami would make suggestions. We'd all talk together. It was very free. He was not a dictatorial leader by any means. He made sure we understood what was the highest principle, but he never imposed it on us. But one day, for some reason, we started talking about building a temple at Ananda Village. And I don't know what the mood was. It must have been something in the water, but we just really let our consciousness go. By the time we were finished, we had designed a huge crystal at the top with gemstones on the sides, and it would be set up in such a way that the morning sun would come through the rubies and the afternoon sun would come through the emeralds, and it was just fabulous. It was really a gorgeous building, and we all enjoyed so much talking about it. Interestingly, for years, Swamiji always referred to that as the best meeting we ever had. Now, from my point of view, it was one of the most ungrounded, loony meetings we ever had, even though at the time it was just fabulous. Years later, Swamiji said to me, he remarked that I'm inclined at times to be negative. Now, if I was going to use a word about myself, that would not be the word that I would use. And then he explained it. I said, me? Really? He said, yes, he said, because sometimes you're so factual. Just like that. And I realized, yes, how many times, in fact, we do take what is possible, and in the name of being practical or feeling that we have to get everybody's feet back on the ground, instead we just cut it off at the knees. Swamiji in the early years used to tell us every year, this was always so confusing for us because he was so practical, really. He was a very practical man, and he manifested so much. It was like how we missed the point for so many years still bewilders me. But we did. He would Spiritual Inuit, which was our summer event, and during those years he gave most of the programs. It was at the end of August. We still have it. And he would say, this year, I really think we're going to have 200 people. We're going to have 200 guests for Spiritual Renew Week. We averaged maybe 15 to 30 guests. that were the facts. And he would always announce that this year we were going to have 200. And we couldn't be really rude. So we would say, like that. Sure, absolutely, yeah, really. And later, I remember talking to him on another occasion, talking to him about prosperity. And he wasn't and is not stupid. And he said, every time I say we're going to have 200 people for Spiritual Renewal, he said, all of you just reject it like that. He said, but if I didn't say we were going to have 200, we wouldn't even have the 30 who come. Meaning, we've got to be in that flow of energy, and that flow of energy is infinite. And the more powerfully we commit ourselves to that flow of energy, quite frankly, then miracles can occur. And the less we believe, the less we pray, the more we pray without believing, the less power there is in those prayers. But as I was saying earlier, I couldn't just tell this woman, pray deeply enough and he will love you. He has his own free will. This is not a belief. This is not believing that he will love you. This is the desire that he will love you. This is the conditional thought that only these things will make me happy, and I know what will make me happy. In the Festival of Light every week, and you all have heard me say this many times, but it's really worth repeating. The bird is sent out by God to tune into divine realities. And he's, as a naive child, Mama says this is true, so I say this is true. But now I'm finding out myself. This is perhaps not the best example, but it's one everyone can relate to. When a friend of mine, who was a very hedonistic and sensual man, who said, frankly, that he couldn't possibly believe that the astral world could be enjoyable, because if there's no sex, how could it be enjoyable? So he said when he was 12 years old, 11 years old, he found Playboy magazine, and he hid it under his mattress. And his mother, who was a pretty tuned-in lady, found it there, and she said to him only this first, I was hoping you would be older before you found this. And he said back, show me something more interesting, Mother, and I'll look at that. You know, just like this is where the energy goes, this is what I want, this is what I believe to be true. And it doesn't matter if the masters tell us that self-restraint is a greater way to happiness, that hedonism won't give you joy, that you'll just dissipate your energy. We only know it when we experience it. And so the little bird went out there, and everyone said to him, this is the purpose of your life, which is to be fruitful and to share, that you are a part of a greater reality. And everything that comes to you, you must pass it on. That's how the blessings expand. He said, oh no, I'm having a really good time doing it my way. And no one can tell me differently. And then as the little allegory goes, and that he enters the stage, it's a wonderful stage, it's called the revolt. And what we are revolting against is not the authority of any particular thing or anybody else's point of view. We're revolting against the way we are made. We are revolting against the source of our own happiness. And in the allegory it says that the bird continued in this attitude, even though repeatedly he lost everything he had. But we're slow, but we learn. But eventually it gets to him, it got to him. And then he asks a different question. Not what do I want, what do I think will make me happy? He asked the question, what is true? What is really happening in this world? And then we enter the stage which is called the quest, where we all live. We haven't quite reached realization, but we're not, well, let me phrase it differently. We're not always in revolt. But if we look at our own unhappiness, if you want to track your own unhappiness, that's a very steady way to track it. When we are in rebellion against that which is. I remember once when I had a profound disappointment in my life in a situation, and it disintegrated because the people and the realities that made it possible had all shifted. You know, this world is nothing but change. Everything is perfect, and then it isn't because something changes. And I was weeping and weeping and weeping because of the loss that I felt. And it occurred to me that what I was grieving over had ceased to exist. It wasn't death in that case, but every part of it had shifted in such a way that it could never shift back. And I realized if I wept over something that was gone, that could never return, I would have to cry forever. There was no end point to that grief. I didn't have the allegory of the little bird at that time, but I was in rebellion against that which is. And God is actually much nicer to us than we think. He leaves us there to cry. If that's what we want to do, he doesn't interfere. We think it would be nice if he would interfere, but it doesn't help us if he interferes because we don't really know then. We've just been rescued. And we get to go back to another fake universe of now it's all just the way I want it to be. See, I got the apartment and the job and the parking place. See, it did come out just my way, didn't it? Look, I have all my stuff back. All my toys have been returned. Yes, yes. Okay. That kind of belief, those prayers aren't answered. We have to believe that we are part of all that is. That our Divine Mother loves us really more than we love ourselves. The way we love ourselves is that we want to be comfortable now. We have a very, very short-term concept. You know, it's not really a very good idea. We want it to be good now. Right? Now. And then we have a very vague picture of the rest of it. We have a very vague picture of the mistakes we made to get us here. We have a very vague picture of what's going to happen if we don't straighten out now. We just want it to just get comfortable again. And so we pray like that. But we're believing in a non-reality. And there's no possible way that divine reality can support something that doesn't really exist. And I had another girl write to me, and she was, her parents had arranged a marriage for her. I presume the letter came from India, but on the email you have no idea. Her parents had arranged a marriage for her. They thought he was a perfect husband, but she didn't think he was her soulmate. And all she'd ever wanted was to marry her soulmate. She didn't mean it in a cosmic sense, but I'm not sure what she meant by it, but the true philosophical meaning I don't think she understood. And he wasn't her soulmate, and this was a bummer, big bummer for her. I gave her various pieces of advice. The last piece of advice, I'm sure, was probably the most unwelcome. And if this marriage doesn't work out, just make the best of it, because the only way to attract a better husband in a future incarnation is to take this one with the right attitude. And then I had the sense to write, I doubt if this is much comfort to you. But the fact is, what you have attracted now is the result of what you have created up until now, of the magnetism that you've put out. If you don't like what you've got, you can't just believe it's going to be different because you want it to be different. Everyone wants things fixed. They don't want to really heal the reality inside of us that brought us to this trouble in the first place. That's a lot harder to do. But you see, that's what we have to truly believe in. We have to believe that within us lies the power to fulfill every dream that you ever imagined. And in fact, as Master describes samadhi, cosmic consciousness, enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy. Isn't that a fabulous phrase? Just as a wordsmith, I love that. Enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy. We have this, we're just like little children. You know how little children are? You know, I have my little tea set, I have my teddy bear, I have this, and we just want a slightly larger version of it. We think that's enough. We think that's the full potential. That's all we believe in. And Divine Mother has an infinite storehouse of bliss, enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy. So we believe in our teddy bear and we want our teddy bear, and we can't understand why she wants so much more for us. We have to believe in Divine Mother's love completely. And we don't get there all at once. We practice when it's easier. When the little disappointment comes, when the little trouble comes, when we're inclined to complain about this and blame for that and hold a little grudge over here and feel that that person is wrong and explain ourselves, well, you see, you really misunderstood me because what I was actually doing was this, and so if you would just be different, then I would be happy. You know, constantly in one form or another. It's actually quite amusing when we finally get down to it. When one really gets the right perspective, we are quite humorous in the way we play this out, just like little children. One time when I was 7 years old and my mother sent me to sleepaway camp, my parents sent me to sleepaway camp, and I was the littlest kid in the camp. I had a great time. I wasn't homesick, but I was smaller than everybody and I couldn't quite do things. And they wove pot holders out of these stretchy bands, you know, these little things. It's a day camp exercise everybody does. Except for some reason, my little fingers, I could never cope. So I had no pot holders. When parents' visiting day came, everybody had pot holders hung on their bunks, but I had no pot holders. So I took some from the bunk above and hung them on mine. I'm a very honest person, and this was a very uncharacteristic thing to do. Of course, like, how long did it take for me to be discovered? A split second. The girl at the top, those are my pot holders. And I kept saying to my mother, they fell. They fell like that. How transparent. I'm sure I was so upset. I'm sure she was between laughter and tears for me. They fell. You know, we're just transparent. We're so transparent to God. Just clinging to our little things when they have so much to offer us. They bring us the nice toy and we want to play with the box. Don't you understand? This is what we have to offer you. The belief that we must have is in God's absolute wisdom, His unconditional love, and his deeply personal concern for us. When Yogananda was close to the end of his life, one of his disciples said, "Will you be as close to us after you pass as you are now?" And Master responded, "To those who think me near, I will be near. To those who believe in my presence and draw that presence by the magnetic power of our commitment to that reality, then that reality will manifest. And that reality is enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy." Don't settle for less. Ask for your infinite inheritance, because that is who we truly are. God bless you.